Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Okay, welcome back. Before we say our names, is there anyone here for the first time or returning after a long absence? Yeah.
I'm Josh.
Josh, welcome. Paul?
My name is Paul.
Andrew?
Andrew.
Errol.
Errol, I claim.
Errol. Oh, very good conversation. I'm a big fan. Okay, we'll go around. My name is Jim.
My name is Errol.
My name is Andrew.
I'm Greg.
My name is Michael.
My name is Mark.
I'm Jason.
My name is Christian.
Paul. My name is Stephen.
I'm Brad.
My name is Ray.
I'm Larry. My name is Jeff.
I'm Bob.
Jack.
Michael.
I'm David.
Mike.
Kevin.
Susan.
Josh.
George.
Laura.
Great. Laura's going to continue her wonderful explication of the 8 excellencies of Buddhist or of mindfulness. Is that?
We'll get into it.
Okay, great. Laura is a longtime 3rd grade teacher. Her kids inspire and...
she's in the right place.
She's long interested in the connection of Buddhist practice and recovery. And she spent her summer vacation teaching teachers how to bring mindfulness into the classroom. So, Laura, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Well, hello, good morning. We had to really want to be here today. I found out, I knew about the marathon, so I left a little early. I parked on Valencia Street, and as I was walking over, I thought of this quote from Hermann Hesse, the book Demian. And in that book, he says, "One never reaches home, but when paths that have an affinity for one another intersect, the whole world looks like home for a time." So again, one never reaches home, but when paths that have an affinity for one another intersect, the whole world looks like home for a time. And that's how I feel when I come here. I think I always feel so warmly welcomed here. And I think we're all here because something in us, wants to come here and share in this collective intention to live an awakened life. And whether we've formally taken the Buddhist precepts or not, we're here because in some way we're taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Buddha as an exemplar of this awakened life. It's not something outside of us, although, I think some people wonder, are we bowing to this beautiful Buddha? I was working with some teenagers at Green Gulch Farm, and one of them didn't know anything about Buddhism, but he said, "Why do you all bow to each other all the time?" And I said, "Well, what do you think that's about?" And he said, "Well, is it kind of like the Buddha in me is bowing to the Buddha in you?" So, and of course, Dharma refers to the teachings of the Buddha, but it's also just the way things are. Just the way things are, and seeing those things clearly. And then finally, Sangha, which is what we're doing right now, coming together to share our intention to live an awakened life. Last time I was here, I shared parts of the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, which was the very last teaching the Buddha gave before he died. I don't know if I shared this with you last time, but one of the last things he said was, "You should be a lamp unto yourself." In other words, he didn't want people just to take what he said as the truth, but to find out for themselves. Although some people say his last words were, "That pork could have been cooked a little bit." I wasn't there. So this teaching is also the last chapter of Dogen Zenji's Shobogenzo. And Dogen Zenji lived in the 12th century. He was the Japanese monk that went to China and brought Zen Buddhism, or Chan in Chinese, to Japan. And he practiced at Eiheiji Temple in the Echizen province. Eiheiji is still there. I'm sure it's burned down several times and been rebuilt. He had a very large following. He was a wonderful trickster and poet and Zen teacher, and I'm from the San Francisco Zen Center, or SotoZen lineage. These teachings from the Shobogenzo and from the Mahaparinirvana Sutra echo and reflect other teachings in Buddhism, such as the Noble Eightfold Path. I'm sure many of you are aware that the symbol for Buddhism is a wheel with 8 spokes, and each of those spokes represents part of the Noble Eightfold Path, which is Buddha's prescription for an end to suffering. These teachings about the 8 awarenesses of the awakened person are also embedded in the 10 precepts and the 6 paramitas. And they're all supports to help us become who we actually are. So I want to continue today talking about the 8 awarenesses of the awakened person. I just want to say, when I came to Zen Center, I was a total mess. And I don't think a lot of people wake up in the morning and say, gee, it's a beautiful day, I think I'll go sit facing a wall and practice Zen Buddhism. Most of us have a sense of urgency. We come here because I think in many cases we've experienced some deep loss or experience of impermanence that brings us here. In my case, I was dealing with the ravages of alcoholism in myself and also in my family. So I came to Buddhism thinking, this is great, I can put on a black robe and be somebody else. And Zen practice sort of encourages that, because we don't really emphasize our personal story or our ego. So that was a great refuge for me for a time, until I realized that that really didn't work, and that I needed to go deeper. What Dogen Zenji says is, take the backward step that turns the light and shines it inward. So he's not recommending, run away from yourself and put on a black robe and sit on a mountain. He's saying, you yourself are Buddha, so look deeply within yourself and find the source of your own suffering. The Buddha taught that the root of our suffering is craving or thirst, tanha in Sanskrit. So as a recovering alcoholic, tanha is a very apt metaphor for the kind of craving that those of us who work with addiction face. So it was only when I realized Zen Buddhism is not about being a better person or somebody else. It's about being who I'm really meant to be. Jim mentioned that I've taught kids for 35 years, and my recovery dates from the month that I went back to school to get my teaching credential, because I realized in a very profound way that I couldn't be worthy of spending my life teaching children if I didn't apprehend this truth about myself and confront my addiction. So that's a big part of my practice. These 8 awarenesses are a description of how we establish and deepen our practice. Last time I shared with you the first 4 of these 8 awarenesses: having few desires, knowing how to be satisfied, enjoying serenity and tranquility, and exerting meticulous effort. For those of you who might not have been here last time, you can see how these awarenesses fold into and instruct one another. So if I do want to say, Buddhism isn't about annihilating all our desires and smashing our ego, because if we had no desire, why would we even get up in the morning? We need to have a healthy ego in the world. It's more putting things in perspective and having a wholesome approach to desire. So as I told you a little bit about my story, I had to work towards having more wholesome desires. Instead of a desire for alcohol, and the people that drank the way I did, to have a desire to wake up and a wholesome desire to live an awakened life. Having few desires means that we do know how to be satisfied. We know how to be satisfied with the everyday pleasures and joys of life, and also how to deeply feel and work through and walk through the tragedies and suffering and losses that we experience in life. And if we can know how to be satisfied, then we can enjoy serenity and tranquility. Coming out of that serenity and tranquility, we're more able to exert meticulous effort in our lives as well. Interestingly, the Buddha called serenity and tranquility, he called that knowing how to live alone. Serenity and tranquility is knowing how to live alone. And, in working with other teachers around this, he didn't literally mean to live by yourself, where no one else can reach us or get to us on a mountainside. But living in the world in such a way that we're not constantly pushed and pulled by things and people who are trying to claim us. So not on the top of a mountain or in a cave. Although I would say, in my case, I lived at Tassajara Zen Mountain Monastery for several years. Withdrawing from the world was very important for me. And actually, I taught children there for a year. We had a family year at Tassajara. That's where I first taught kids and found within myself this love for teaching children. So many people withdraw at Tassajara, and in sitting there in the mountains, a deep desire arises in them, and they know what they want to do with their lives. Some deep inmost desire can come to the surface if we withdraw for a while. In a way, we do that just when we sit quietly, the way we did this morning. We're withdrawing from the world, not in a cold or, rejecting way, but in a kind of warm way. Buddha compared these first four awarenesses to going into battle wearing armor. So even when we're exposed to the dangers and the traps of the world, nothing can harm us if we have few desires and know how to be satisfied, etc. So in my practice, this is what I mentioned about taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And that's just another way of saying being completely ourselves. The word Dogen uses for thought is nen. And this consists of two characters in Japanese. The top one means right now, this very moment. And the bottom part of that, the bottom character refers to mind. So right now, this very moment, and mind, to kind of protect the beauty and the sovereignty of this moment and our own mind. Dogen famously says, this very mind is Buddha, that we don't have to seek outside of ourselves for something beyond us, but to look within. So this is the mind we take to our sitting cushion, and the mind we take into our everyday lives. So there's a way to put this in the midst of our busy lives, knowing how to live our own truth, and having the integrity to follow our deepest intention. And for me, that was being worthy of teaching children. My third graders are my best teachers, There's a saying I came across in Zen, which is, when in company, behave as though alone. When alone, behave as though in company. And that's a kind of koan. What does that mean? That in company I'm acting like I'm alone, but when I'm alone I'm acting like I'm in company. To me, what this means is integrity and equanimity. It's being the same person no matter what circumstances that I'm in. And also doing the appropriate thing even when no one is looking. So I'm sure many teachers here, including me at some point, has talked about the Buddhist precepts. Not to kill, not to take what is not given, not to misuse sexuality, these 10 precepts. that we do those, we honor those precepts even when nobody is watching us or grading us for our behavior. So the next 4 of these awarenesses are not forgetting right thought, practicing samadhi, cultivating wisdom, and avoiding idle talk. So I'll share about each one of those. Right thought is really embedded in the first 4 awarenesses. Buddha compared it, as I said, to going into battle wearing armor or protecting our mind, as Dogen said. So right thought, and I want to say it's not right as opposed to wrong. You know, the Noble Eightfold Path is spoken of right thought, right effort, right intention, right mindfulness, right wisdom, but not right in the sense of the opposite of wrong. It's right more in the sense of being upright or being wholesome, being nourished by these things. You know, Buddha said, I teach about suffering and about an end to suffering. And one of the main forms of suffering he talks about is the suffering we create for ourselves. When we lie, when we steal, when we misuse sexuality, when we intoxicate the mind or body of self or others. So the precepts are a prescription to help stop our self-created suffering. So right thought, right now, this very moment, this very mind is Buddha. Practicing samadhi is the next. Dogen said, samadhi is dwelling in the dharma undisturbed. I just had a funny thought of Suzuki Roshi, the wonderful Japanese monk who came and founded the San Francisco Zen Center. When he was dying, he said to his students, "Don't worry, I know who I am. Don't worry, I know who I am." You know, and if practice or recovery can give us anything, it's to truly know who we are and deeply accept ourselves with all of our little idiosyncrasies and flaws. Don't worry, I know who I am. He also called samadhi, which is meditation, gathering the mind. Gathering the mind. Zen comes from jhana in Sanskrit or chan in Chinese and refers to quiet thinking or contemplation, taking the backward step and turning the light to shine inward. This is a beautiful poetic way Dogen used to speak about meditation. He also called it a state of contemplation when the mind and the object are one, or absorption. Absorption. Interestingly, this word absorption is also applied to gifted athletes, you know, when they're totally absorbed in their sport. You probably know the book Zen and the Art of Archery, where the archer and the bow and the target are all one. So people have this kind of absorption when they're deeply engaged in some athletic activity. Artists are in absorption when they're deeply creating their art. So this is not something that's just delegated to meditation or mindfulness, although all of those things require mindfulness. The sixth patriarch in our lineage, Hui Neng, said, samadhi itself is the substance of wisdom. Wisdom itself is the functioning of samadhi. So there's really no shortcut to this samadhi. There's no freeway to samadhi, wisdom, meditation. But in Zen Buddhism we say, just sit. You know, after I'd been sitting for about 20 years, counting my breath the way we do in Zen, I went to my Buddhist teacher and I said, you know, I've been counting my breath for quite a long time now. You know, what's next? And she goes, well, that's about it. So I went back to counting my breath. And counting our breath is really just coming back to ourselves, you know, when the mind strays. And the straying, by the way, is part of meditation. And the coming back is part of meditation. Buddha said we practice samadhi or meditation for the sake of the water of wisdom. The water of wisdom. And water seeks its own level. So Buddha said, we cultivate samadhi for the sake of the water of wisdom. Then cultivate samadhi well and don't let it leak out. I think we've all can look at a time in our lives, or even maybe right now, some of us are going through a time of painful isolation, of doubt, of not knowing which way to turn. When we feel totally alone on this path. And of course we know that's an illusion. But often that sense of aloneness or loss or impermanence is when we turn towards Sangha or fellowship and find, paths that have an affinity for one another, as I said in that quote from Hesse. And when we find Sangha, when we find Buddha, when we find Dharma, this sense of isolation can begin to ebb away. And we can begin to feel at one, not just with others, but also with our deepest self. We can be a worker among workers, a person among people, not separate anymore. And that separation, of course, is one of our most painful delusions. And again, it doesn't mean abandoning ourselves, but being truly ourselves with all that means. So practicing samadhi or sitting quietly and following our breath, to put it simply. The next one is cultivating wisdom. And the Buddha said wisdom is aroused by hearing, reflecting, practicing, and realizing. So wisdom isn't just, a gift we're given with age. In fact, in my family, our motto is, you can be young once. You're only young once, but you can be immature indefinitely. So, wisdom doesn't automatically come to us. It's actually an action, It means that time after time, when we've been presented with a choice, we try to turn in a wholesome or appropriate direction. This is what the Buddha said about wisdom. When you monks have wisdom, you are without greed. Always reflect upon yourselves, do not lose this wisdom. In this way you can thus attain liberation in my dharma. One who does not is neither a follower of the way, a monk, nor a white-robed layperson. True wisdom is a stout boat which crosses the sea of old age, sickness, and death. True wisdom is a stout boat which crosses the sea of old age, sickness, and death. It is also a great bright torch in pitch-black ignorance, a good medicine for all sick people, a sharp axe which fells the tree of delusion. When one has the illumination of wisdom, even though one's eyes are merely physical eyes, one is a clear-seeing person. That is what is meant by wisdom. Those of us in recovery are very familiar with the serenity prayer, where we ask for the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. This prayer was actually written by a theologian named Reinhold Niebuhr, and he wrote this prayer to aid soldiers in World War II. And it's a very beautiful prayer that was adapted in 1935 by Alcoholics Anonymous. So in recovery, we ask for the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. But anyone, I think, can really use that phrase. In Buddhism, we call it a turning phrase to help turn us in the appropriate direction. I do have to say I love that Angela Davis says she asked for the courage to change the things she cannot accept. Which, as an activist, I can really appreciate that. Yeah. So I think that's a good reminder that this doesn't mean lying down in the face of injustice. And for me, a searing image of Buddhism, the first one I remember seeing was that image of the Buddhist monk during the Vietnam War who immolated himself and sat upright engulfed in flames in protest of the war till he finally fell over. I'm not recommending that, by the way. But, when I saw, oh my gosh, that kind of intention someone could have about injustice. And, we don't hear about this, but many Tibetan monks have done the same thing in protest of China's treatment of Tibet. Often we need spiritual friends to help us know the difference between the things we cannot change and the things we can change. And seeking spiritual friends as we do here, the fellowship of others, is also a kind of wisdom. For myself, I could never recover from alcoholism until I became humble enough to ask for help. That was something I'd never done. I was the kind of person who never had a piece of furniture I couldn't move myself because I didn't want to ask anyone for help, And so what I found when I stepped in the rooms of recovery is that I had to ask for help, I had to be willing to accept help, and then I found I was also worthy of offering help to others. And that was the seed of recovery for me. Another reason I found an urgent need to recover was I realized that many wonderful Buddhist teachers had not been able to confront their own alcoholism or sex addiction and had destroyed their communities because of it. Wisdom is the ability to both enjoy and appreciate differences among us, and at the same time understanding that nothing has a complete, separate and independent existence. Now, after all this highfalutin stuff about cultivating samadhi and wisdom and everything, the very last of these 8 awarenesses is avoiding idle talk. And I think I shared last time, I love that Alice Roosevelt said, if you don't have anything nice to say, come sit next to me. So this has been a difficult one for me because I love idle talk. And what is idle talk, actually? I think, we use words for many different purposes. And, when we ask somebody, how are you doing? It might be considered idle talk, but it's a way that we connect in a kind of a non-threatening way. I went and saw the comedian Adam Schultz recently, and he said, he struggles with addiction, with depression, and addiction. But he said, the next time somebody asks me how I am, I'm just going to tell them. So somebody said, how are you? And he said, you know what? He said, I feel like I'm walking on a rickety wooden bridge over a great abyss. I'm in the middle of the bridge. I can't go back. I can't go forward. When I look down on either side, I just see darkness descending. I just don't know where to turn. And the person said to him, well, we just want you to know we're very grateful that you're a Comcast customer. And I thought, at Safeway they used to say hi to you. Now they ask you how you are, and I'm going to tell them that sometime. But so this is what Dogen says about avoiding idle talk. Having realization and being free from discrimination is what is called avoiding idle talk. To totally know the true form of all things is the same as being without idle talk. That's pretty highfalutin in itself, I think. To totally know the true form of all things is the same as being without idle talk. So, strictly speaking, pretty much everything we say is idle talk. I mean, I think if we avoided idle talk, it would be pretty quiet around here, actually. But many of the precepts deal with how we use speech. We can use speech to disarm people with humor. We can use speech to keep people at a distance. We can use speech to make people feel included. We're seeing now in our country terrifying examples of how people use speech to divide us and make us fearful of one another. And I mentioned the 10 precepts. 5 of them, you could say, are about speech. Not lying, obviously. Not disparaging the 3 treasures. The 3 treasures are Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, so not casting aspersions on the Buddha way. Not harboring ill will. We might think of harboring ill will as something we do within ourselves, But actually every time we gossip about someone or spread stories about people or share our resentments about other people, clouding their ability to see someone from their own point of view, harboring ill will can be all about the opposite of right speech. Another precept, not slandering others. And then not praising self at the expense of others. That reminds me of somebody with orange hair. I don't know who I'm thinking about. Right speech is something we could spend our whole lives working on, and I think just if we looked at our own speech and worked on with that, would be a golden pathway to enlightenment. How do we talk to ourselves? What do we say to ourselves? Do we perpetuate the suffering caused by destructive language in the families we grew up with? If we grew up with addiction or mental illness or homophobia, how did we, take that in through our pores? My mother was from New Orleans, and I asked her, how did you avoid the kind of horrible prejudice you grew up with, And she told me something interesting. She said when her father lost all of his money in the crash of 29, they were very well off. She had to go to public school. When she went to public school, she was exposed to all kinds of kids she never would have known about. And that immediately smashed every prejudice that she'd been taught about them. Of course, she had to cultivate an open mind to counteract that prejudice. So idle talk, is our Zazen mind full of idle talk? We've all had the experience of sitting down with the intention of being perfectly mindful, and then we're talking to ourselves about resentments or plans or memories. In our spiritual practice, we may need to make amends for things we said in the past, harmful things we said to other people. At the same time, we should appreciate the power of speech to bring people together, to inspire one another, to entertain one another. Speech can mend a broken heart, can comfort the lonely. I don't want to give money to people on the street, but I carry water with me. Because it just occurred to me how dehydrated people must be when they're standing on one of those islands, asking for spare change. And so for me, when I say to them, could you use some water? And it gives me a moment of contact with them I know I'm not contributing to their addiction and doing something helpful, Otherwise I wouldn't have occasion to speak to them or get a sense of who they are. Speech can make us laugh, it can connect us with one another, can teach us about things we want to learn. Speech can warn us about dangers, true dangers. So being aware of what we say and its consequences, speaking in such a way that we don't create a gap between ourselves and others, I think this is a way to cultivate wholesome speech and right speech and use speech to connect ourselves with one another rather than to keep us at a distance. Again, it seems like many of us somehow intuitively come to practice because of some inner wisdom, this quiet voice inside of us that wants us to quiet our minds and connect with other people and find wholesome desire within the world. And it's essential to finding equanimity in our everyday lives to cultivate these 8 aspects of the awakened person. And I don't think these are a distant goal, having few desires, knowing how to be satisfied, enjoying serenity and tranquility, exerting meticulous effort, not forgetting right thought, practicing samadhi, cultivating wisdom, avoiding idle talk. These aren't some, distant goal that we need to aspire to. We can start, as Dogen said, right in this moment with this mind. We can start. We can take a step. And I think being together is a priceless jewel. it's said of practice, this chance rarely occurs in any lifetime. The image for that in Buddhist lore is that having the opportunity to practice Buddhism is like a board with a knothole in it floating on the ocean, and a turtle swimming up underneath it and being able to see through that knothole. I bet you didn't know how lucky you were that you found Buddhist practice. And another quote that I love is Hakuin Zenji, who was a wild man and a poet. Hakuin Zenji is the character in that story, Is That So? You know, this wonderful Buddhist story where these villagers came to Hakuin Zenji with a baby, and they said, our daughter has told us that you are the father of this child. And Hakuin said, is that so? And they gave him the baby to raise. He took the child, he raised it as best he could. A couple of years later, they came back with their daughter in tow and said, oh, we're so sorry. Our daughter finally confessed that the father of her child is a fisherman in the village. And Hakuin Zenji said, is that so? You know, this is a kind of equanimity where the people are attacking us or praising us. We can let it roll off our shoulders like water off a duck's back. So that's a story that I learned very early in my interest in Buddhism. Is that so? But Hakuin said, having had the good fortune not only to have been born into this life as a human being, but also to have encountered the teaching of the great Shakyamuni Buddha, how can we help but be overjoyed? So it's always a joy for me to be here. Thank you very much for your kind attention. And we have some time for discussion. So whatever might have come up for you, you might have a story to tell or questions or answers. So the floor is open to you now. Yes, Bob.
I don't know if this is what you had in mind, but when you were talking about idle talk and people asking, how are you?
Mm-hmm.
I have the self-delusion that people mean the question, and I make the major mistake of telling them.
I hope you're not standing on a rickety wooden bridge over a bus.
I try not to look down.
Yes.
I think one of the paramitas is renunciation. Is that true?
Not directly, but
No.
it's sort of embedded in there.
But I'm just wondering, in terms of having few desires, being connected to renunciation, and in this culture, that being seen as such a self-depriving thing. I just wondered whether you could address.
Yeah. A Tibetan teacher said, renunciation, nobody wants to hear about renunciation. It's like a pig doesn't want to get hit in the nose with a stick. That's the weirdest quote, but none of us want to get hit in the nose with a stick. Renunciation is a word that comes up a lot in spiritual practice. And, you know, when I hear the word renunciation, I think of a hair shirt and self-flagellation. Mm-hmm. To me, a more wholesome approach to renunciation is to have the wisdom and the clarity to renounce the kind of self-sabotage and self-inflicted suffering that we bring on ourselves. A phrase in recovery is the deliberate manufacture of misery. So renunciation, it could mean not having that fifth cookie. That might be part of renunciation, or working on ourselves in the sense of changing some of our habits. That's a kind of renunciation. But it's also renouncing our negative approach to the world, renouncing our judgment of other people, renouncing our delusion that you and I are separate, when actually we're deeply, as I look at you, you are in my body, and my words are in your ears. We're, even on that level, it's not a metaphor, we're literally connected to one another. A renunciate, a nun, in Catholicism, I think it's, maybe I'm misreading Catholicism, but it's more renouncing the world. But I don't think Buddhism is about renouncing the world, but cultivating a kind of, not a cold rejecting detachment or renunciation, but I would say kind of a warm sense of humor about it. You know, because when we really know that everything changes, except Jennifer Aniston. I have to always say that. When we know that everything changes, then we can lighten up and have a more easygoing approach. We know that this too shall pass, you know. So renouncing our limited points of view, is that helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
I would like to ask you to repeat earlier in your talk, you talked about something about we can't go home, but we realize when our paths cross. I also wanted to put in a footnote. True Catholic or true Christian mystics like Teresa of Avila had a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
And I think what we are handed down is really a distortion.
Yeah.
And frankly, a prejudice against traditional Christianity. But I think true Christian mysticism is it's very similar to Buddhism. That aside, if you could just say that phrase again, because it had a resonance for me.
I will, and thank you for saying that about Teresa of Avila. I mean, I would also say Thomas Merton, who was a great friend of Buddhism, you know, and had that breadth of mind to see the universality of these teachings rather than the exclusivity of them. So this is Herman Hesse. One never reaches home, but when paths that have an affinity for one another intersect, the whole world looks like home for a time. You know, and I think sometimes we meet someone and we just have this immediate affinity. And I'm kind of agnostic about reincarnation, although I did believe it in a previous lifetime. You know, I wonder about reincarnation. When you meet someone and you immediately feel this kind of affinity or connection for them. And there's someone in this room right now, for example, it's so weird. We run into each other all over the place. The other day I was at Social Security. I look over, there he is. You know, can I just say who it is? It's Paul. Paul and I met years ago, just, you know, in passing. We just chatted with each other. And since then, I was at the Andy Warhol. We were talking about Andy Warhol. I was at the Andy Warhol exhibit. Paul and I encountered one another. And that's a wonderful feeling, you know, in this city of so many people, to see someone you know who you have an affinity with and you feel you're on the same wavelength or walking the same path. It's tremendously comforting. For me, when I see people who I know are also in recovery, it's tremendously comforting and encouraging. I can send that quote in, and I did that last time with something that somebody asked me to say. Yeah.
You talked a lot about your recovery. I'm wondering if your recovery started in Buddhism, or did you turn to Buddhism later after your recovery began?
For many people, I don't know, I shouldn't speak for anyone else. For me, I came to Zen Center after hitting an alcoholic bottom in Juneau, Alaska. And, you know, I went up there to cure myself, but I heard somebody say in a meeting, I took a train, but my alcoholism took a plane. So when I got to Juneau, Alaska, which is one of the drinking capitals of the world, I really entered what I would call the heart of darkness. And but I had this glimmer of hope that maybe I need a spiritual way of life. So I came to Buddhism, I came to the San Francisco Zen Center, I just stopped drinking, and I practiced for 5 years. I loved the clarity of not drinking. And then I started thinking, I think I'm okay. Actually, after 5 years, I had my first drink. I met my husband at Zen Center. We got married. On the first night of our honeymoon, somebody had given us a bottle of champagne. And I said to him, I'd like a glass of that. He said, I've never seen you drink. I said, I know, but, you know, I was married. I'd been married for 6 hours. I think that showed I could make a commitment. I was okay. I think I proved that I don't really need alcohol. And so alcohol started creeping back into my life. And so I sort of drank secretly for another 5 years, which was very painful for me. And I stepped into the rooms of recovery when I realized I just could not do this by myself. And it's really important for me when I work with people in recovery who are interested in Buddhism to really say, Buddhism did not cure my alcoholism. And if it could, then these Buddhist teachers I'm thinking of, who I won't name, who so destructively ended their lives and affected negatively the lives of many others, it would have cured their addiction too, and it didn't. So I don't know. For me, I need both the roots of recovery and Buddhism. Some people, maybe for some people Buddhism is enough, but I would never want to take that chance. You know, for me, they're like an Indra's net of support taken together. There are many, many widespread groups of people who are studying both Buddhism and recovery at the same time. Yes?
So I think I'm going to talk about what I've been thinking about from your talk, because it connects, but I want to start off with actually naming one of the Tibetan Rinpoches that you are trying not to talk about, because his name has been mentioned here a number of times, and I feel like it's important to, I went to Naropa University, so I feel like it's important to at least name it, that Chogyam Trungpa was one of those people who definitely had an alcohol problem and created a complicated community.
That's correct.
But from going to Naropa and being witness to both his wisdom and also the demise and the complications around that, and my teachers who studied under him, and yet they're still devotion to him, and just kind of looking at it all, it brings me to this little kind of inquiry I'm exploring right now from your talk in terms of your quote of when in public places or when in crowds be alone, and then when in alone be with other people. So that larger idea that for me, that, you know, being human is about, I think, getting to play with different parts, different, you know, the idea of I'm a performing artist, so getting to put on different masks, getting to be able to play with all of that is part of the joy of being human.
Yes.
But we also, I think the Buddhist perspective has given me is that we also have this Buddha nature, so how do we really still maintain that connection and not get lost?
Yeah.
And I think that probably on some level was what Chogyam Trungpa was trying to explore, was his involvement as like getting to be a human, but also holding this larger vision. And sometimes we fail, I guess, is what is within that.
Well, you know, Pema Chodron was asked, I was at a very big conference with her, and she was asked about her teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, and how his alcoholism had affected her. You know, he died as a result of an automobile accident where he was drunk. You know, my own Buddhist teacher, and she would not really answer that question. My own first Buddhist teacher almost destroyed our community with sex addiction. And you know what I realized in practicing with that was, it's not an either-or kind of thing. My first Buddhist teacher was tremendously helpful to me, and he had these incredible human flaws that were very destructive to himself and others. So I don't have to come down on either side of that. I can appreciate what he taught me, and the fact that he established Zen in the West with these wonderful centers, Green Gulch Farm, San Francisco Zen Center, Tassar Zen Mountain Center. And, you know, he reminded me a lot of Bill Clinton in his, you know, very dynamic and helpful person with his shadow side that undermined him. So I don't think it's an either-or kind of thing. How tragic, though, that Trungpa's son now has also had some self-destructive and community-destructive elements to his personality. You mentioned theater. For me, I was always in theater, and playing with different parts of my personality was really healthy. And I think I shared with you before, one of my third graders, who was the youngest person in our school to come out as gay, was a very dramatic kid in my class, and I said to him one day, you're so dramatic and so emotional. You might love theater. I said, I was in theater as a kid. I was in community theater. I did a lot of plays in high school. I majored in drama. I always wanted to be an actress. And he looked at me and said, so Laura, what made you abandon your dreams? Stick the knife in. So I think we can play in the fields of our Buddha nature, and I don't think Buddhism tells us, don't go there. I think if we take our clarity and our intention wherever we go, we can do it in a wholesome way. And I'm sure as a performer, that I think of many actors and performers who were engulfed by darkness and perished because of it, So I think playing Malat Sad, and I played one of the inmates of the sanitarium, and so I was playing an insane person. And it was a little bit frightening for me to see that I had this crazy person inside of me, and that I could have given range to that part of my personality if I wasn't careful. And if you think about the movie Lord of the Flies, all the kids that were in that movie had to go into very deep therapy after that, because playing those parts on that island touched and unleashed a kind of primitive side of themselves that they were way too young to be dipping into. So, Buddhism is full of paradoxes, and I think we can treasure the teachings of Chogyam Trungpa, and we can also look at his life as a cautionary tale, that his life was cut short and his teaching was cut short because of addiction. This is a disease. It's not a question of character. So, is that helpful?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of have the dialogue.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
We are at the end of our time. Thank you, Laura, once again.
Thank you. Thank you for having
treasure.
me.
I was going to ask you, what do we do about Mitch McConnell in our spiritual life?
Oh, you mean Moscow, Mitch? Somebody asked me that about Cheney.
Yeah.
And they said, she knew somebody who lived right near Dick Cheney, and she said, he's somebody I'd go fishing with, So I said, well, don't go hunting with him. And I wouldn't go hunting or fishing with Mitch McConnell.
Oh, I don't want to be in the same room, but that's...
but you don't hunt and fish in a room, so...
we have outside, there are refreshments, there's some sweets and some fruit. There's a sign-up sheet on La Credenza. I'll be going around or standing stationary with the Dana bowl. We encourage you to explore the joy and generosity of giving Dana. It supports all expenses that we incur as a community. And in the Pali, it evidently suggests not just feeding monks and paying or helping the indigent, but paying for public projects like a new well or a new water tower. And this certainly is a water tower or a well in our lives. So feel free, anywhere from 10 to 1,000 is more than welcome. A number of gentlemen will gather at the door at 12:30 and go out to lunch together, or with Susan if she wants to come to. There's no... I think that's it. Laura, would you bless us with a closing?
Jim,
very happy to.
Yes.
Jim, I just want to make one statement.
Yes.
If I might. last week I made some statements which apparently were deemed offensive by some people, and I wanted to apologize to all those people who were offended by them. But on the positive side, I want to note that the request to consider your dana window between $10 and $20 has in fact made an effect. It's been noticed and noticeable, and I want to thank everybody for that.
I was the treasurer.
And again, we talked about the problems of that the Gay Buddhist Fellowship is having. And once again, I want to say that I or any board member is willing to listen to any thoughts or suggestions that you have to improve the situation, because we are a Sangha, we are a community, and we exist and survive together. Thank you.
Okay.
Take in a deep breath. We come together and celebrate our intention to live an awakened life. May this glowing flame within us, this wish for peace and joy, spread outward from here and cover the entire world. May all beings be happy. May they be joyous and live in safety. May we be happy. May we be joyous and live in safety.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.